In the harshest moments of the Middle Ages, when hunger bit deeper than ever and options had all but vanished, people didn't resort to eating mere filth or garbage. They turned instead to a source of nourishment that, by today's standards, would turn most stomachs. These were crawling, twitching, many-legged creatures that many at the time believed were the only reason they managed to stay alive when even rats had disappeared from the cellars and alleys. But what exactly were they eating when conventional food had long vanished from their world? For starters, they didn't have to go far to find something. Beetles were virtually everywhere. These tough-shelled creatures lived tucked away in wood piles, tucked under the thatch of roofs, and hidden beneath rotting logs. They scuttled about their business, blissfully unaware that they were about to become someone's desperate dinner. But their protective outer shells posed a real problem. No one could just take a bite as if they were munching on an apple. So, medieval people came up with a strategy. They roasted beetles over open flames, not just to make them easier to chew, but also to kill off any parasites that might be lurking inside. Some even saw a kind of logic to it. These beetles came in natural armor, self-contained meals if you will. After roasting, some people ground the insects into coarse powder. This beetle flour was then stirred into thick gruel or mixed into oat-based cakes. The most frequently eaten varieties included meal beetles and bark beetles, which were both easy to find and offered decent nutritional value. Why beetles, though? Because despite their appearance, they were incredibly rich in protein and fat, exactly what a starving body cried out for. They were also free. No need for elaborate traps or weapons. The only hunting required was flipping over logs and grabbing them before they escaped. Over time, the preparation even took on a social feel. People gathered around fires, roasting beetles together like one would roast marshmallows at a campfire today. The scent? Nutty, though tinged with bitterness. Flavor took a backseat to function in those days. And soon, no one needed to explain the strange crunching sounds during dinner. But beetles were just the beginning. When summer rolled in, grasshoppers bounced through vegetable gardens like nimble acrobats. In good seasons, people shooed them away with annoyance. But during famines, those same people saw them through a different lens. Suddenly, they weren't pests. They were protein. Yet catching these fast-moving insects was no easy feat. They moved like lightning, faster than a startled hare. Early mornings proved to be the best time to catch them, when the chilly air made them slow, like a person groggily rising from bed on a winter dawn. Once caught, the first task was always the same: remove the legs and wings. Nobody wanted stringy bits caught between their teeth. Then came boiling, the most preferred method of preparation. It softened their green bodies and made them less threatening to chew. Drying them opened even more possibilities. Once dried, they could be ground into a flour patch with protein, something that could be mixed with grain to stretch the food supply. Think of it as medieval protein powder, harvested straight from the garden floor. When the alternative was rotten meat, grasshoppers suddenly looked like a banquet. Descriptions from the time described them as earthy, nut-like, not delicious, but certainly edible. The problem? They spoiled fast. Fresh grasshoppers rotted within days, which made drying not only smart but essential. At least dried ones didn't try to leap out of storage baskets. Still, grasshoppers weren't the ultimate treasure of the medieval insect pantry. Hidden inside the papery nests of wasps lived what many considered a true delicacy: fat, white grubs. These larvae were soft, pale, and loaded with nutritional gold, high in both fat and protein. But to get to them, one had to face off with furious adult wasps. So, people developed a clever trick: smoke. Small fires built beneath nests would lull the wasps into a stupor, making the harvest just slightly less suicidal. Timing was everything. Early summer was best, when the larvae were plump and had yet to transform into buzzing stingers. Wait too long, and you'd find only husks where the prize once was. Surprisingly, these larvae looked more appealing than most insects, like soft grains of rice. No shells to crack, no bitter flavors to mask, just clean, soft protein. They could be added directly into stews or porridge, absorbing flavor while enriching texture with a creamy richness. They were so valued that families often saved them for the sick, the weak, or pregnant women who desperately needed the extra calories. It was the medieval equivalent of nutritional baby food, protected by very angry flying guardians. Yet, another insect offered even more surprising challenges: ants. Unlike beetles or grasshoppers, ants weren't hunted individually. They came in masses. Either you collected thousands at once, or you came back with empty hands. These tiny creatures blanketed the land like living waves. Some people dug into anthills with sticks and scooped the insects into woven baskets. Others swept long marching lines off forest floors into sacks. Ants, at least, had the courtesy to march in organized formations. But they came with their own chemical weapon: formic acid. It made them incredibly sour, enough to make your mouth pucker for hours. Boiling was the only way to tone that down. Long cooking times reduced the acidity, turning unbearable tartness into something tangy, even flavorful. Some even used boiled ants as a form of seasoning, a primitive yet punchy medieval hot sauce. Different types of ants gave different results. Large black ants had more meat, but were harder to gather in numbers. Small red ants were everywhere and easier to collect. And nutritionally, a handful had as much protein as a whole egg. When hens stopped laying due to famine, ants quietly filled that role. Although explaining why your scrambled eggs were crawling was a bit awkward. Not every insect, however, required so much effort. Enter the humble woodlouse, the peasant's no-fuss fallback. No traps needed, no fire pits or smoking nests. Just flip over a wet log, and there they were, clustered together like little armored soldiers. These tiny gray crustaceans were found beneath nearly every moist stone, damp floorboard, or mossy wall. They were perhaps the only bugs who didn't try to escape, but their environment was filthy, and they carried harmful bacteria. Cooking them properly was non-negotiable. Boiling worked well to disinfect and soften them. Dry frying was also popular, giving them a crispy texture and a taste some compared to toasted sunflower seeds. The surprise came in their flavor. Many found woodlice more palatable than other insects, likely due to their nutty crunch. Cooks either tossed them whole into thick stews or mashed them into paste and combined them with small meat scraps to stretch out precious protein. They were quite literally the medieval version of budget meals, and best of all, they were always around. While grasshoppers fled in the cold and beetles vanished in the frost, wood lice remained huddled in their damp homes. year-round survival food that didn't require a chase. When the cold months gripped medieval Europe, even the humble woodlouse became a lifeline. These tiny gray crustaceans, always hiding beneath damp logs and stones, were consistent and easy to find, even in winter. But as practical as they were, even woodlice didn't represent the lowest point of survival food. Because when things turned truly desperate, when hunger dragged people to the edge of human endurance, some turned to something far worse. Maggots, wriggling, pale, revolting maggots. These fat-bodied larvae emerged anywhere rot took hold. Festering meat, decaying corpses, compost piles, and dead animals. Where death thrived, maggots swarmed. Collecting them required more than physical effort. It demanded a complete shutdown of human revulsion. Many starving souls couldn't do it. Even starvation had its limits, and maggots tested those limits daily. Yet, for some, survival meant swallowing disgust. The reason? Fat. These larvae were shockingly rich in essential fats and proteins. When there was nothing else, this was nature's greasy, writhing lifeline. Before eating, they had to be washed, and not just once. Multiple rinses removed the worst of the filth, though nothing could make them entirely clean. Even after boiling them into soft, white blobs, the psychological hurdle remained immense. Those who managed to eat them described the taste as surprisingly rich and creamy, thanks to the fat content. But the hardest part wasn't the flavor. It was the fight against your own instincts. Many people vomited on the first bite, losing not just their composure, but precious nutrients their bodies desperately needed. The tragic irony of rejecting the only food left because it was simply too revolting to keep down. And still, maggots weren't the most dangerous insect-based food. That title belonged to the caterpillar. While some caterpillars were harmless and nutritious, others could kill within hours. The challenge was knowing which was which. These soft-bodied larvae could be found everywhere, in berry bushes, cabbage patches, and fruit trees. But their colorful patterns, which often resembled tiny rainbows, were actually nature's warning signs. Caterpillars that fed on toxic plants absorbed those poisons into their bodies, making them dangerous to consume. Bright colors, fuzz, or spines often indicated toxicity, but not always. Guess wrong, and the price could be your life. Immediate cooking was necessary, as caterpillars spoiled more quickly than any other insect. Their bodies began to rot in just a few hours, especially in warm weather. If you didn't eat them fast, you didn't eat them at all. Flavor depended entirely on their diet. Those raised on sweet fruit tasted mild and pleasant. Others that nibbled on bitter leaves carried that bitterness in every bite. As they say, you really are what you eat. And that applies doubly when you're eating something that's been snacking on something else. Local knowledge sometimes helped people identify the safe species. But even that wasn't foolproof. Each bite became a gamble between starvation and poisoning. Still, sometimes nature delivered abundance in overwhelming waves, like when the locusts came. Locust swarms brought destruction to crops, but also opportunity to the hungry. These insects arrived in such numbers that the sky turned black. Entire fields vanished beneath them. But where most saw ruin, some saw resources. Locusts were so numerous that harvesting them required little skill. Nets, baskets, or even children with sticks could gather hundreds in minutes. Families would divide the work. Some plucked off legs and wings, while others immediately boiled or roasted them before they spoiled. Drying became the preferred method for long-term use. Locusts laid out on wooden planks in the sun could last for months. Roasting brought out a nutty flavor, and the dried insects were often ground into powder to enrich breads and gruels. It was survival, industrialized. Entire villages sometimes turned into bug processing workshops. And when the locusts vanished as suddenly as they came, those who had stored enough could trade their surplus for other necessities. A protein windfall wrapped in an ecological disaster. But while some insects required chasing, harvesting, or enduring mental trauma, others simply came to you. No traps, no effort, no decision, just a grim reality baked into everyday life. Because the most consumed insect protein in medieval times didn't come from beetles, grasshoppers, or locusts. It came from right inside their daily bread. Stored grain attracted uninvited guests. Flower beetles, weevils, moth larvae, tiny insects that thrived in the cracks of granaries and sacks of wheat. Eggs were laid in wheat kernels. Larvae burrowed through the grain. And once that grain was milled, there was no separating what was bug from what was bread. Stone grinding wheels turned grain, eggs, larvae, and insects into one inseparable mixture. Tiny bits of insects were baked into every loaf. During hard times, people didn't bother removing visible bugs. Why waste calories? The high baking temperatures ensured safety, killing bacteria and parasites. Insects were so small, they vanished into the texture of the bread. Most people didn't even notice. And ironically, while communities labored to gather visible insects for food, they were consuming thousands of invisible ones with every bite of bread. The original fortified flour, protein enhanced, whether you wanted it or not. This accidental source of nutrition played a key role in survival. The bugs in bread helped prevent protein deficiency during long famines, even when people had no idea they were being saved by the very thing they tried so hard to avoid. In the end, medieval survival demanded a blend of resilience, creativity, and a strong stomach. Sometimes, it meant rethinking what food really meant and what lines a human being is willing to cross when there are no other options left. If this journey through medieval insect cuisine left you stunned or slightly queasy, give this video a thumbs up, share it with your fellow history buffs, and don't forget to subscribe to Sleepy Timelines for more fascinating dives into the past. Now, here's a question just for the brave among you. If you had to eat just one of these medieval insect meals for a week, which would you choose and why? Tell us in the comments. We're curious, maybe more curious than we should be.